All right, so this is the second part of our Vue application with Laravel API, and in this video we want to cover the CRUD actions of our application. So we want to cover creating, reading, updating, and deleting posts. In the previous video we covered the authentication system, and now we are going to move on, and this will be the last part of this API series. All right, so we want to start with creating a post, and in the previous video we created a page for our create view. So inside source folder, then views, and then posts, we have a create view that has only a title at the moment. We also protected that route. That means if we try to go to that route while we are not logged in, we are redirected to the login page and we need to log in. Now, I actually ran a fresh migration on my database, so I don't have any user. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a new user for this video. So with this information, if I press register, I am back to the home page and my user is created, and now I can go to the new post page and create my form here. So back in our Vue app, I have the create view open, and we just want to create a form tag, and within that we will have a div with an input field of type text and then a placeholder that says post title, and that is our first input field. Then we will have a text area, and we don't need these attributes, and I just want to keep the row attribute and also add a placeholder that says post content. We also need a button, of course. We want to apply the primary btn class to this one with the label or the text that says create. And on the form tag itself, we want to set the width to half and mx auto and also a space y6. So this is our form. So the process and the steps we are going to take is going to be very similar to the previous video, but it's going to be even easier because we already set up most of the things in the previous video. So we want to get the data out of this form. Let's create our form data up here, and we want to set that to reactive from Vue and pass an object as the initial value with the properties within that object. So we need the title that will start with an empty string, also the body. Now we want to bind that using vModel for our input fields. So let's say vModel on the title input field, and we will bind that to form data.title. Same thing for the post body. So again, vModel and then form data body. Now on the form tag itself, we can add @submit prevent, and we will set this to console.log form data just to make sure everything is working properly. All right, so this is our submit event listener, and if we go back to our website, open console, let's add some data here, press create, and of course we get that into the console. All right, so now we need a function to submit this data to our API. And we could do it here because this is the only place we want to call it. But since we've already covered stores and we have our auth store here, we can just have another store here and have our errors state in that store and use that store to have all the functionality within it. So I think it's cleaner and it's a good practice to work with Pinia. So let's create a new document in the stores folder, and I'm going to call it posts.js. So similar to our auth store, we want to create one and have our state and functions. So let's say export const, and we want to call this use posts store. We will set this to define a store from Pinia, which is imported for me up here, and we want to give it an ID. So I will say posts store, and the second argument, which is our options. So I'm passing an object here that will contain our state, which will take a function as its value, and that function would return an object. What I want to have here is our error state. So that's the only state we want, which is again not necessary. We could have it locally in each component, but this is just for practice. So it really doesn't matter if you want to have the errors state inside your component or here as a global state. Then we want to create our actions object and have the functions for our CRUD application. So I'm going to have a comment here. It says creating a post, and we want to submit the form data to our API. So we need to create an async function, and I'm going to call it create post, that will take the form data from our component. So then we want to create our response within this function and set that to await and fetch and then our endpoint. So the endpoint we want to use is /API, then posts, and then provide the options, because this endpoint is expecting a post request with the headers and the body. So let's set the method to post That is the first one. Then we need to add the headers. Now we already set some default headers like the accept property and the content type, so we don't need to include that, but we do need the authorization key because this route is protected by auth sanctum in our backend application. So let's provide the authorization key within this headers object, and we want to set that to backticks and bearer space the user token. Now the user token is in our local storage and we give it the name token. So inside this curly brackets, which is our template string, we can say local storage get item token. So that is the second property in our options within the fetch API. And as the last option, we want to submit the form data in the body of our request. So we can set the body to JSON stringify and then use our form data. So when we get the response, of course, we need to convert that to JSON. So we can say const data and set that to await res.json. And as usual, let's just log that into the console and we'll see what we get. And after we see the result, we will take the next steps. All right, so again, we are just repeating ourselves like the previous videos, making an API call to our endpoint, providing the information and logging the results into the console. Now we need to call this create post in our create view component. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring in that create post function. So I can destructure our store and we want to grab create post. And then we want to set this to use posts store, which needs to be imported from our stores folder and of course needs to be invoked. So now down here, instead of this console.log, we can use that create post and pass down that form data. All right, so let's see what we get in the console when we submit the form. So I'm going to give it a reload first and just press create without adding anything. And we get a 422, which is a correct response because there are some errors here. And we get an object where we have the error messages and the message itself. So we want to grab these errors and show them to the users. And for that, we are going to use that errors state we declared up here. Before that console.log inside our create post function, I can check with an if else statement and say if the data errors was true, then set this errors, which is our errors state, to that data errors object. Otherwise, log the result into the console. So now let's grab this errors state in our component as well. And again, just like the previous video, we can either destructure it or grab the whole store. I'm going to use the curly brackets to destructure our store, and we want to say const errors inside the curly brackets. Then we want to set this to a store to refs, because remember, when we destructure a state, they lose the reactivity. So we need to wrap it with this store to refs function. So within this function, we want to use our store. Just like this, we want to say use post store. And again, don't forget the parentheses. And now we can grab that errors. So under our title input field, I want to add a p tag. And first I will have a class error. And then I want to check that if the errors title was true, if we had a title key in our errors object, then we will show that in a p tag with the class of error. We can say errors again, title. And remember, this is inside an array. So I can grab the first element using the brackets. Then I'm going to copy this p tag and paste it under the text area. Just change the property title to body. All right, so that's it for the error messages. And if we go back to the website and reload, press create, now we can see the error messages properly showing on the screen. Now let's actually create a post and see what we get. So I want to say post 1 and add some content here. Press create. We get an object in the console and we stay on the same page and we will fix it in a moment. But you notice the object we get in the console is just a post. So for this simple application, this is fine. But much like the React videos, I want to make a few changes in our API because you might need the user who created this post in this object, in the return object. Let's go back to our API application for a moment and open your post controller inside the Laravel API app. And if you scroll down, we have this store method, which we created in the first videos. And our return statement at the moment is just the post. So we create the post and then we return it. And that's the object we get in the console. So let's say in your Vue application, you have a posts state and you want to update that state whenever a post is created. And you need the user who created that post. So we just need to change our return statement from this statement, which is just the post, to this statement, which is an array with two keys. So we have the post and the user who created this post. And we can grab that user using this syntax because we created a relationship between these two models. So if you want to make a change in your post controller in your API application, this is the statement you need to change. And you notice I have this in other functions. We will get to those when we are working with them. For now, let's just take this step by step. All right, so now with this change, if we go back to the website and try to create another post. So I just want to say post 2 and add more content and press create. This time you notice we are getting an object with two keys. We have the post itself and the user. So of course, user is this user who created the post. But if you take a look at the post object, we have the information about the post as well as the user. So this is the Laravel behavior, which includes the user object within the post object, and we can easily access that by going to post and then user. So this will make our job a lot easier if you were going to grab the user who created the post. Anyway, we are successfully creating a post, but we are staying on the same page. So we want to navigate the user back to the home page when they create a post. So again, and this is quite easy because we already set up Vue Router as a plugin for our Pinia. So in this else block, I can delete that log and say this.router and then use the push method to push the user or redirect the user to another page. So we can pass an object here and then provide the name of the new page we want to go. So that's all we have to do in this else block. So let's do it one more time. This time I'm going to reload the page first and then say post 3, add some content, press create. Now we are back to the home page, and this is where we want to show all those posts, and we will fetch them from our API. So again, we need to create a function for it, and inside our post store, I'm going to copy this comment and add it on the top and say get all posts. So again, we need an async function, and I'm going to call it get all posts. Let's say const res await and fetch, and we want to fetch our posts from API posts, which is a get method, so we don't need to include the options. Then we can convert that to JSON using await res.json. And then of course we want to log that into the console, and make sure you add a comma after this curly brackets in your actions object, otherwise we will get an error. And this is our get all posts function. Now we just have to call this on our home page whenever the component is mounted to the DOM. So let's open our home view, and in the script tag we want to say unmounted, which needs to be imported from Vue, and it takes a callback function, and we just want to call that get all posts from our post store. So we need to import this. So let's say const get all posts, and we will set this to use posts store like this. Now let's go back to our website. If we reload the page, we get an array with the posts we just created. So we created 3 posts, and this is what we have. But if you take a look at the objects, you can see this is only the post. So again, we are not seeing the user who created this post. And we will do that in a moment. But if we go back to our Vue app, we can see that our method is returning a promise, and we want to wait for that response. So what we can do here is to create a variable and set that to ref or reactive from Vue, and then populate that using our function. So let's do this. I'm going to create a posts variable and set that to ref from Vue. So make sure it is imported up here, and as the initial value we will pass an empty array. Now we want to save the result of this function inside this posts variable. So first we need to return the data instead of just console.log. So after that log, I can say return the data. Back in our home view, I can say grab the posts and set the value of that to this get all posts, but we need to wait for the result. So we add the await keyword, and of course that means we need to make this whole function async. So let's just add the async keyword before this callback function. And now we can use this posts variable in our markup to show the results to the users. So let's create a div, and the first thing I want to do is to check if we actually have results. So let's use vif directive and say if posts.length is greater than 0, then we can loop over that array and show the results. So let's create another div and use the v4 directive this time, and we can say for post in posts, we will render something. So first we need to provide the key attribute, and we will bind that to post.id. And then I just want to have an h2 with the post title. So let's say post.title in the curly brackets, and we'll see if this works. All right, so back to our website. I'm going to reload. We can see the titles of each post. Now let's fix the problem with not getting the user. And again, for that, we need to go back to our API application. So the method we are calling is the index method in our post controller. And at the moment, we are just returning all the posts without the user or without sorting it. So I'm going to delete this and bring back this line of code. We are returning posts, this time with the user. So this with method in Laravel allows us to make database queries or return the result based on the relationship between models. So it doesn't have to be just two models. It could be multiple models, and you can pass the name of the model inside this with method. At the moment, we have only two models that are connected with one another, and we are just saying return all the posts with the user who created that post. And we will see the result in a second. And also we are chaining this latest method, which is a convenient method that sorts the data based on the created at column in our posts table in a descending order. So we have the newest posts on top. And at the end, we are just using the get method to grab all the results. So with this change, let's see what we get in our console. You notice at the moment it says post 1, 2, 3. And if I reload, it says post 3 to 1. So it is sorted in a descending order. And if we take a look at the console, you notice we have 3 objects, and each object or each post has this other object within it, which is the user who created that. And this is exactly what we want. We want to grab the post user and their name or ID or email. So let's go back to our Vue application, to the home view, and we just want to make this post block look better and provide more information. So on the div with the v4 directive, I'm going to add some classes. So we have border left, which is blue, and some padding on the left and margin at the bottom. Then on the h2, which is the title of the post, I just want to say font bold and some larger text. And then under that h2, I will have the name of the user or the name of the author of the post. So first I'm going to add some classes here. And for the content of that p tag, I want to say posted by the name of the user. Now, again, this is quite simple. We already have access to each post, and each post has an object that is the user, and each user has a name. So we can say post user name. And underneath that p tag, we will have another p tag that is just post body. So this is the block of code for our posts. And if we go back to our website, we can see our posts. Now we are checking if there are any posts up here. Let's say there are no posts. So after this div, which is the wrapper for this v4, we can add another div and say v-else and render something else. Let's have maybe an h2 or h3, it doesn't matter. And we want to add the class title and say there are no posts. So of course we can't see that at the moment, but if we go to our API project, open the database, and let's go to the posts, and I'm going to delete all of these. So if we go back to our website and reload, we can see there are no posts. Let's create a post here. So I want to say newest post and add some content, press create. Back to the home page, we can see the post that was just created. Anyway, that is reading all the posts. The next step is to create a link here for each individual post. That will take us to a separate page for that specific post. Again, back to our home view, we have the post body, and within that p tag, I just want to create a link here. So we want to use the router link, which needs to be imported from Vue router. Right, so up here it is imported for me, and we want to close the tag like this. And for the text, I just want to say read more and 3 dots. And also add some classes here, just some blue text and font bold and underline. So this is our link right here. And when I click on this link, I want to go to a page with a dynamic route. So we need to have the ID of the post in the URL. So we can bind the to attribute just like before and pass an object here. First, we can provide the name of the route we want to use, and let's call it show. So we will create the route in a moment. And also we want to have parameters in our route. So we can pass another property to this object, which is params, and set that to another object. So we have another object within this object, and then have key value pairs here. So we want to have the ID, and the value of that is going to be post ID. So if I format my code, you can see the errors are gone, and we want to go to a route called show, and that route will accept parameters, which we will call ID, and the value of that is going to be post ID. So it's going to be just a number. Let's go to our index.js, which is our router, and create a route for that show link. So I'm going to copy this create route and paste it down here. Let's change the name to show. For the component, for now, let's just leave it because we don't have a component, and we don't want this meta tag because this is a public route and anyone can access whether they are logged in or not. Now the path should be dynamic. So let's say I want to go to posts /1, 2, or whatever the ID of the post is. In order to have dynamic values in our URL, in Vue router, we can use colon and then the name of that parameter. If I say colon ID, that means this route is now expecting a parameter with the name ID. And that's why in my home view, when I click on that link, I am providing that using this statement. And we can have multiple parameters and we can call them whatever we want, but these names should match. So if I had another parameter, let's say name, I could just say colon name, and back to the router link, I can provide another property within the params object and say name, for example, and I'm going to just set it to John. But let's create a component for it so we can pass it to this object in our router document. So inside the posts folder, I can create a new file and I'm going to call it showview.vue. And let's create our script tag and just a simple template. And for now, I just want to say show like this. Now let's go back to our index.js, and instead of this create view, we want to use that show view. So we need to import this. I have this create view up here. I can duplicate that and just change this create view to show view. All right, so now let's click on our link on the home view, which is this one, and see what we get. So if I reload the page, you notice we don't have any warning or errors. If I click on this link, we go to /posts and then 4, which is the ID of that post, and then the text John. So that is coming from these parameters. So that name, of course, was just an example, but we don't need it. So I can delete this from index.js, and I can also delete this from the parameters object. And if we go back, press read more. Now we go to posts and then /4. Now all we have to do is to make another API call based on this ID and grab that post. First, we want to create a function for it, and I'm going to close this router document we don't need. So back in our posts store, we have get all the posts. I'm going to copy the whole thing and paste it down here. So for the comment, I want to say get a post. For the function name, I want to say get post. Then we want to use the fetch API and call an endpoint, which is supposed to be dynamic. So let's delete this and use backticks and say /API /posts and / the ID of the post. So remember, this is the route in our Laravel API that is returning a single post. So let's say we are just expecting a post here. So we want to make a call to that route, and we grab the JSON data and we will log that into the console and also returning it. So now we want to call this function in our show component. Right here in our script tag, again, like the home view, we can say unmounted, importing it from Vue. We want to call that function. For now, let's just pass a callback function and say get post. And of course, we need to import that. So let's say const and get post. We want to set this to use posts store and import that from the stores directory. Of course, now this is expecting a post ID. Since we know our post ID is 4, I'm just going to pass 4 here, and we will fix it in a moment. But for now, we just want to see the result. Back to our website, if we reload, you can see we have an object in the console that is just the post. So the same problem with the store and the index method, we are not getting the user, but we already know how to fix this. So let's quickly fix this by going to our API project and to the post controller. We already fixed index and store. Now want to change our show method, which is returning just a post at the moment. So all we want to do here, delete this old statement and replace it with this return statement, which is similar to the store method up here. If we go back to our website and reload, now we have an object with the post and the user, and we also have the user object within the post. So now back to our show view, we want to grab this ID from the URL instead of hard coding it. That means we need to access the route. For that, we can use the useRoute function from VueRouter. Let's create a variable here, and I'm going to call it route and set that to useRoute from VueRouter. Make sure you bring in route and not router because they are quite similar and both of them are from VueRouter. And on this route, we can access the parameters. So in this getPost function, instead of this number 4, I can say route.params.id. So this ID is the name we used in our router link as well as the index document. We said our parameter is called ID, and that's why we can grab it using the route instance of VueRouter. So going back to our website, we still get the same object. That means we are getting that number. Now all we have to do, just like the homepage, create a variable for it, set it to ref from Vue, and initially we want to set this to null. So I am importing ref up here and setting that to my post variable, and when the component is mounted to the DOM, I want to populate that post. So let's make this function async because this getPost will return a promise. And then we want to say set the post value to await getPost and pass the ID of the post from our route. Now we can use that post variable in our component. And I'm going to grab this markup from the homepage. So I can copy this whole div with the vif directive all the way down to this second div, which has the velse within it. So I can copy that, and then inside the main tags here, I can paste it. Now in this vif, we are saying if posts.length, but that doesn't exist anymore. So we can just say if post like this. If that is true, then we don't need to loop over it, of course. We can delete this v4 and this key attribute. We do need the classes though, so keep that. Then we will render the post title, the post username, and the body. We don't need this router link, of course, and we can delete that. Now, if that doesn't exist, so else we can say, for example, page not found or post doesn't exist. If we've done everything correctly, this should work. Back to our website. I can see I made a mistake here because we can only see the name of the user. And the mistake I made is here because right now that data we are returning is an object with two keys, post and the user. And all we need is the post itself. We can fix that by going to our posts store, and in this get method, instead of returning the data, which is an object with two keys, we want the post. So we want data.post. Now back to our website. If we reload it, now it works properly, and we just have to add some margin on the top. In the show component, instead of margin bottom here, I can say margin top, and that will fix the problem. We have our individual post. Let's create another post with a different user and see if everything works properly. I'm going to log out, and of course I can view this post even though I'm not logged in because this is a public page. But now let's register a new user. So I can use this information, press register. We are back to the home page. I'm going to create a new post here and say Sarah's post and add some content. Press create. Back to the home page. Now we have two posts from two different users. And if I go to this post, I can see the URL is pointing to post number 5, and we are getting the proper post. So all is left now is deleting and updating our posts. So let's just start with deleting, which is easier, and it could be done on this same page. So in our show component, we can add a button here for deleting a post, which needs to be a form because we need to submit that to our API. I'm going to close the home page, by the way. I don't think we need it. And under the post body, which is this p tag, I'm going to create a div and then create a form in here. Then within that form, I just want to have a button that says delete. I'm also going to add some classes here to make that look a bit nicer like this. Also on this div, which is the wrapper for the form, I'm going to add these classes. So this is the new section in our show component. If we go back to our website, we can see the button down here. And when we click on this, we want to submit that form to our API with the information that our delete route needs. Let's go to our posts store and create a function for it. So I'm going to copy this comment here and paste it under create post function. We want to say delete a post for this function. And again, we want to create an async function. We want to say async delete post. And then within the function, we can say const res, set that to fetch. The endpoint we want to use is going to be dynamic because again, it is expecting a post ID. So I can say /API /posts, and inside $ curly brackets, I can pass post down here. Now, there are a few things we need to consider before making a call, but I will add it in a moment. Now we want to submit this to our delete route, right? So we need to set the method. We need the authorization key because that route is protected by auth sanctum. And we need to make sure the user who is submitting this form owns the post. So first, I'm going to add the options to this fetch API. Let's set the method to delete like this. And then again, we need the authorization key inside the headers. So let's just copy this from the create post method and paste it down here. So I forgot to add the await keyword here. So make sure you do that before the fetch. Then we want to create our data and set it to await res.json. We don't actually need this data, but we want to just log that into the console and see if everything is correct. So let's just say console.log data. Now again, like I said, we need to check before submitting this form if the user owns the post. So let's add an if statement up here before doing anything. In this if condition, we want to check if our authenticated user's ID is the same as this post user ID. So we need to access our auth store. So first, let's bring in auth store, and we will set this to use auth store that needs to be imported up here. Now in this condition, I can say if auth store user ID is the same as our post user ID. Now we have two ways to do this. We can accept another parameter and say post user ID, or we can accept a post object here and then use that in both places. So we know both of these information are coming from the post itself. In here, I can say post.user_ID. This is the property we have in each post object. And down here, instead of just post, I can say post.id. So remember, this route is expecting a post ID. So we can just use the ID property and submit the form. So we just have to remember that this delete post function is expecting a post object and not primitive data. So this way we have only one parameter. So if this is correct, then we will make a request. Otherwise, we don't do anything. So I will cut everything here and paste it within this if block and format my code. All right, so again, if our authenticated user's ID is not the same as post user ID, we will not make that request at all. All right, so now we have a delete post function. Let's go back to our show view and import that up here. We are already importing getPost. We can just say import delete post as well. And then on this form tag, we can call that method when we submit it. So let's say @submit and then use the prevent modifier and say delete post, which is now expecting a post object. So we can just say post without adding anything. Now let's see if this works, and we will add more conditions to it. So at the moment, I'm on a post that belongs to this user. So this is correct. I can see the button and I can click on it. But let's go back to the home page. If I go to this post, which belongs to John, I can still see the button. So we need to fix that. We shouldn't be able to see the button at all. And if I press delete, I should get an error. But let me reload first so we get rid of these logs in the console. And if I press delete, you notice we don't get anything because post user ID is not the same as user ID. In fact, let me add an else block here, and I'm just going to add something to the console. So let's say console.log and say you do not own this post. Now back to the website. Again, if I press delete, now we can see that message in the console because I don't own this post. So we are not even making that request to our API. But let's actually delete this post. So if I press delete here, you can see this message, which is coming from our API that says the post was deleted, but we are still on the same page. And if we reload, we get page not found because we are trying to read the post that we just deleted. So we need to redirect the user back to the home page when we delete the post, but we don't even want to get to this point. So we want to hide that delete button. If I go to a post that I don't own on this page, for instance, I shouldn't be able to see this delete button. So we can simply add a VIF directive to this div and have the same check that we have in our delete function on this div wrapper. So let's import our auth store. So I'm just going to bring in auth store completely and set it to use auth store. We could again destructure this and only bring in user, but I want to keep things simple. And on this div, which has the delete form in it, I can use the VIF directive and say if auth store.user is true and auth user.id is the same as post.user.id, then we will show this button. And I'm adding this second logic here because this page can be accessed by anyone. So even if someone is not logged in, they can access it. And if we don't include that, this will give us an error because we are trying to read the ID of a user that is not logged in or doesn't exist. So this will give us an error if we don't include this. So if I save this and go back, you can see this delete button is gone. And if I create a new post, let's say again, Sarah post, and press create, then go to that page, we can see that button because I own this post, but I don't own this post that was created by John. If I log out and log in with that user, press login. Now, if I go to this post, I can see the delete button, but if I go to this second post, which is my post, I can see that delete button. And if I press delete, it actually works, and I just have to go back to the home page, and you can see it's gone and that post doesn't exist. So we just have to add that bit of a code here in our delete function and say if the response is okay when we make a request, then redirect the user back to the home page. So I can add an if statement and say if the response was okay, just go to the home page, and we can grab this line of code from create post method and just paste it down here. So remember, this response object would have an OK property that we can check. If the response was OK, then go to the home page. Otherwise, maybe we can bring back that log just to make sure everything works properly. All right, let's do it again. So I don't have any post with this user, so let me create one. So I'm just going to add gibberish here, press create, and this is the post I just created. If I press delete, I am back to the home page. So one more time, just to make sure everything works, I'm going to create a post here, press create, read more, delete. We are back to the home page and we can see everything was deleted. So I'm getting a lot of logs into the console. Let's delete some of these. So for example, this else block we don't need. This was just to make sure everything works. For now, I'm going to keep this one for the delete function in case we had errors or something. Let's keep that one. But up here, we have two logs for get all the posts and get a post. So I'm going to delete these two logs. All right, now all is left is updating a post. So let me again create a post so we can actually see it. And right next to our delete button, we want to have a new link to go to a different page to update a post. So let's start with the component. In the posts folder, I want to have an update view. So let's say update view.view. We will have our script tag, and then we will have a template with the main tag, and we just want to say update for now. Then we want to go back to our show component or show view. Maybe after this delete button, which is this form, I want to have a router link. So let's say router link, and make sure you import it from view router up here. And for the text, I just want to say update, and then I will copy these classes from the delete button and add it here, and just change the red color to green in both places. All right, so this is our link. You can see it on the screen. Next, we want to add a route, and we will come back for the two attributes of this router link, which is going to be similar to the show link we had on the home page. So let's open our index.js, and we want to create a new route. So let's copy this show route and paste it down here. For the path, we can have, for example, posts, update, and then the ID. Or we can just say update ID. It doesn't really matter. For the name of the route, we can say update. For the component, we can say update view. Again, we need to import it. So I'm just going to copy paste one of these lines and change the name to update view. Then go back to the route. And again, we want to add the meta property because this is a route that is only for authenticated users. So we covered this in the previous video. We can add this meta to a route that belongs to authenticated users. And this function down here will make sure that if they are not authenticated, then they go to the login page. All right, so this is our update route. And now we just have to provide that to attribute or prop for our router link. So we want to bind that to attribute and set it to an object. Let's set the name to update. That's the name we gave to our route. And then for the parameters or params, we want to pass another object and set the ID to post.id. All right, so this should work. Now, back to our website. You can see the ID of our post is 10. If I press update, we go to that page and the ID is still 10. Let's go to this post, which belongs to Sarah. And I can't see the link, but I can see the ID up here, and I can just manually add the update text. I can go to that page. So we want to prevent this in the component and make sure if the user is not the owner of the post, they will be redirected back to the home page or some other page. So let's start by going to that page again. And we want to create a form first, just like the create page, so we can have our update form. Back to our Vue project, I'm going to close this show view and this index.js, then open create view.vue. And from our create view, I'm going to grab everything. So I'm going to select all, copy, and then replace it with what we have in the update view. So we are importing the errors state from our post store and this method, which we don't need. So I'm going to delete this. Then we have our form data. So we do need that. And then we are down to the markup. We just want to update our title to say update your post, and then delete this submit action for the form. We will add it later. And then we can move down all the way to the button that says create and just change that to update. Everything else is the same. So back to our website, we can see our form. Now, the first thing I want to do is to populate these input fields with the data we have in our database. So first, let's create a post variable and set that to ref from view. We will set this to null as its initial value. Now, this part is just like the show component. We want to grab the post based on the ID, which we have in the URL, and then populate this form data variables from that post. So let's grab that get post from our post store. So I will set that to use posts store, and I want to call this when the component is mounted to the DOM. So again, we can say unmounted, pass a callback function here, and set our post value, which is a ref, to await get post. So we need to add the async keyword to this callback function, and this get post is looking for an ID, which we can get from the URL. So that means we need to import route from Vue router. So up here I can say const route and set that to use route from Vue router. So now I have access to the route, and I can say route.params.id inside the parentheses for my getPost function. So this will set the post variable to a post if it exists when the component mounts. Now, when that happens, I want to set the value of the title and the body to this post title and body. So I can say form data .title and set that to post.value.title because it's a ref, and that's why I'm saying value. And same thing for the body. So I can just copy paste that and change the title property to body. So if I've done everything correctly, now we should have the values of that post in the form. Going back to our website, we can see the text for the title and the body. Now again, this is because I own this post and this is fine. But if I go to the post with the ID of 6 like this, I can still see that. And we need to prevent this. If I try to access this page, which is not my post, I need to be redirected back to the home page. So this unmounted function would be a good place to check because we have access to the post and we can check if this post user ID is the same as the authenticated user ID, and if not, we can redirect them back to the home page. So again, we need to import a few things. First, we need to import our user, and I can destructure it or bring in the whole store. This is really your preference, and sometimes I bring in the whole store, sometimes I destructure it. But if you are destructuring the user, which is a state, we need to use a store to refs. And I'm using a store to refs because we are already importing it. So anyway, we want to use the auth store inside this function. So now we have access to our user, and we can check if that user ID is the same as the user ID for this post. So after we get the post, we can add an if-else statement and check if our user.value.id, and again, I'm using value because now this user is a ref. If that ID is not the same as our post.value.user_ID, then we will redirect to the home page. So I will add this in a second. Otherwise, we will populate the form. So I will move these curly brackets after these two statements. So now we want to use the Vue router to push the user to the home page if this condition is true. For that, we need to grab Vue router. So not the route, but the router. So again, let's say const router this time, and then use a router. So you'll notice here we have two imports from router. One is route and one is router. Now on that router object, we have that push method, which we have been using in our stores. So we can say router.push and then provide an object and the name of the route. Let's say homepage. So that's all we have to do in terms of protecting our route. Now, just to do a quick recap, we are protecting that update route in our Vue router index page using this meta. So this is only for authenticated users. If they are authenticated, they can access the page. But in the component itself, we are checking if they are authorized, meaning they own the post. And that's why we have all these imports and going back and forth between the stores. Anyway, this should work if we go back to our website, and if I try to access this post that I don't own, I can just add the update to the URL and press enter. You can see for a second I saw that page, but I was redirected back to the home page. So this would be a good place to add a spinner, for example, to check all of this. But anyway, if I go to this post, which is my post, and press update, then I can see the values and I stay on this page, and of course I can update it using a method which we will create now. All right, so we are almost done. Let's go back to our post store, and I just copy one of these comments and paste it down here. We want to say update the post. So it's going to be similar to this delete post. Let's copy everything from this delete post and paste it down here, and then change a few things. So of course, change the name to update post. So then we want to check if the user ID is the same as post user ID, then we will do the request. Otherwise, we don't. Now, the URL is going to be the same for the API route, but the method is going to be different. So the method is going to be put because now we want to update a post. We do need the headers, so we need the authorization key, but now we need the body as well because now we are submitting a new data for the updated post. So we can say json.stringify, and we can use our form data, which we will accept as a parameter up here. So this method now has two parameters. One is the post itself, and then the new post or the new form data. So then when we make a request, we will wait for the JSON response, and we will save that inside this data variable. Then we can check if there are any errors, show the errors, or update our errors state. Otherwise, go back to the home page. So I'm going to cut this router statement and then delete this whole thing, add an if-else statement, and say if data errors was true, then update our errors state and set this to data.errors. Otherwise, we want to push the user back to the home page. So I can paste that router statement inside this else block, and that's all we have to do for the update. All right, so now back to our update view. We just want to import that update post. So up here, we already have the get post. We just want to grab update post as well. And on the form tag, we can say at submit, add the prevent modifier, and say update post. So this is expecting a post. We can just say post and the form data. So let's say form data, and let's see if everything works properly. So right now I am on my update page. So this is my post. If I delete the title, so the title is empty, and press update, we get the error message that is required. If I bring it back and just add maybe some new text here, update it, and press update, we are back to the home page and I can see the updated text up here. But like the previous video, we need to reset our error state, because if I go to the update page again, you can see the error is still there. So what we can do here, when we push the user back to the home page, we can set the error to an empty object again. So I can say this.errors and set it to an empty object. And now if I go back to that update page, there is no error. So if I do this, so there is an error now, but if I update it again, and now we are back to the home page. Now let's go back to the update page. The error is gone because we reset that. And that was the last action for our application. So we covered creating, reading, updating, and deleting a post. And with that, our API series is completely done. We created a full API with authentication using Laravel and Laravel Sanctum. And also we covered two front-end applications using React.js and Vue.js to use that API, and we created our applications. So I want to thank you all for your views, shares, subscribes, comments, and all your support. And it is very encouraging to see you guys liking my videos. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you all at the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.